Now in this edition of Let's Talk Some Star Wars, we'll finally be taking a look at the results of the poll that asked the question, what rating would you give The Rise of Skywalker? And I know I said I'd have this video up a few days ago, but I've just been really busy with a lot of different things lately, and hadn't found the time to sit down and read through all the comments, nor do I like to half-ass a video and post something just for the sake of posting it. I've always felt if people are going to take the time to watch a video of mine, it should be the best effort I can put forth, and hopefully actually worth watching. Along those same lines, if you've sent me emails or tried to contact me in some other way in the past few weeks, pretty much since The Rise of Skywalker came out, you probably haven't heard back from me, but don't take it personally or anything. Again, just been super busy with several different things, including, at long last, getting to work on my next fan fiction project, which is going to be my own totally different version of the sequel trilogy. And without getting into any details really, it's going to be by far my biggest, most ambitious project yet, and in time I'll probably be looking for everything from artists to voice actors who want to help out. But for now, I'm still working on the outline because, oddly enough, I think it's a good idea to have a solid game plan in place before tackling something like this. Okay, so enough of that for now, let's get to the results of the poll, where we'll see that 28% of voters fell right in the middle, and thought that The Rise of Skywalker was an average movie and gave it 3 stars. 22% then thought it was good and gave it 4 stars, while 8% thought it was amazing and gave it 5. On the other side of things, 18% didn't think it was very good and gave it 2 stars, and 25% or a quarter of all voters thought it was simply a terrible movie and gave it 1 star. And when we do all the math here, it means that The Rise of Skywalker ends up with a score of 2.7 stars, and do keep in mind that 3 stars, not 2.5, is the middle ground or average, which means this ends up being a slightly below average film. Also, when compared to the other live-action Star Wars films we've rated in the past, it finds itself in 10th place overall, and only above The Last Jedi. And before going any further here, I will give the usual disclaimer that yes, the results of this poll do not necessarily reflect the whole fandom, but if you think that the people who voted here in this poll are automatically haters of all things Disney Star Wars, let me quickly give you a sneak peek at the other poll I did recently, and a video on that one is coming in the next few days, hopefully. And we'll see that pretty much the same people who voted on The Rise of Skywalker and were rather split and gave it below average, have nothing but love for The Mandalorian. In other words, you can't just say everyone who gave this movie negative votes are Disney haters and call it a day. Now sure, undoubtedly, some people who haven't seen the movie voted anyway and gave it 1 star. Now how many did that? It's very hard to say, but let me just say thank you to those of you who didn't see the film and passed on voting this time. I certainly respect your stance to not see it. I do wish I had more than 5 options on these polls and could include a I refuse to see it option. Anyway, let's just jump right into the comments now. And as usual, a big thank you to all of you who voted and or commented, as well as to those of you who sent in your artwork or other images for me to use. It's all greatly appreciated, so thank you. Okay, so let's start, as we always do, with the top-rated comment, which this time came to us from Phrase Roche, who said, "This film needed that Hayden Christensen deleted scene." And of course, I absolutely agree, and I think it says something that this was the top comment, and that there were other similar comments about Anakin not being in the film that also got a lot of upvotes, that there are a lot of people upset that all we got from him in this whole trilogy is a voice amongst many at the end. That the one and only thing this trilogy actually did was change the ending of the saga from Anakin making a sacrifice to defeat Palpatine, to all of the Jedi now coming back to defeat him for good this time, maybe, because if he came back from being tossed down a shaft and being blown up in a Death Star, I'm not so sure what's stopping him from coming back yet again after being incinerated by lightning. But beyond that, even just seeing Anakin on screen again, seeing him as a Force ghost and maybe interacting with Luke or Kylo Ren or even Rey or all of the above really, would have been an awesome and great way to tie all the trilogies together. And how cool would it have been to see Obi-Wan and Anakin standing side by side as Force ghosts again, with Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan this time. And it's just so sad that there are so many other missed moments in this sequel trilogy, like seeing all the old characters together one last time. Alright, next up here we have this comment from Alyssa's Red Ruby, who said, "You know those movies that you just can't stop thinking about? This was not one of them, but I enjoyed most of it. I did. I didn't really like it, but I enjoyed it while I was watching it. It's a complicated movie, and my opinion on it is complicated." And I saw a lot of comments very similar to this one. People who said they really didn't like the movie, especially after the fact when they thought about it more, but they enjoyed watching it. And that's kind of how I felt, because I personally don't hate the movie. It's okay for what it is, and it does an okay job of wrapping up the sequel trilogy at least. But there are many things about it, especially when put into the bigger context of the whole saga, that bug me or that I really just don't like. And overall, I wouldn't say that I hate the sequel trilogy as much as it just makes me sad that it really could have been something so much better if they would have just had a plan and found the right people for the job in the first place. Moving on then, our next comment comes to us from 13 Paul 13, who said, "When you start shooting spaceships out of the sky with force lightning, you may have taken things a little bit too far. Disney been watching too many superhero movies and not enough sci-fi." And yeah, I agree with this. Palps hitting a whole giant fleet of ships with force lightning was a bit much, to put it mildly. Especially since he managed to, as far as I could tell at least, only hit the resistance ships with the lightning, and he didn't hit any of the Star Destroyers. And overall, the sequel trilogy certainly ups the power levels quite a bit, far more than even the prequels did, I'd argue. Because in the prequels, we mainly see abilities first used or seen in the original trilogy, simply used more frequently and more effectively at times, you could say. Not a bunch of new abilities or those old ones taken to crazy new levels, as we often see here in the sequels. Alright, next up here we have this comment from High Heel Knight Reviews, who said, 4 stars. I think the movie was almost as good as it could have been considering the circumstances and JJ's track record with conclusions. No matter what anyone's opinion of the films and projects, I think that we all can agree that Disney greatly mishandled the Star Wars property from the moment George Lucas finished signing the contract. The idea of churning annual Star Wars films based purely on the brand's marketability, unwise. Making a trilogy by having a different writing and directing team each allowed to do their own thing, unwise. Making an episode 7 that really is the start of a volume 2, unwise. Making an episode 8 that intentionally radically shatters the foundations of the brand, unwise. Long story shorter, it would take a combination of Shakespeare, Hitchcock, and Dr. Seuss on their best days to make a practically perfect episode 9. And yeah, I think you're right. I think JJ did about the best he could with what he had to work with. That pretty much no one could have made a perfect movie considering where the previous movie left the story. And I'm actually oddly curious to know what Rian Johnson would have even done with episode 9 had he been the one to write and direct it. I wonder if he gave any sort of outline or story treatment to JJ with what ideas he had, or if he didn't have any real clue where the story would go next when he was making The Last Jedi. Okay, moving on, our next comment comes to us from Yankee Vetter, and my apologies if I butchered your name. Anyway, they said, "I loved it. I think so many people feed on hate and negativity that they go out of their way to hate everything and not just Star Wars. I mean, society in general, no one is happy with anything anymore, no matter what it is, and social media has turned everyone to the dark side. Very few things on social media are positive. It's all just breeding hate and negativity. So, as a lifelong Star Wars fan and going into it having zero expectations, I absolutely loved this movie. I didn't know what to expect after The Last Jedi, and this was 1,000 times better than that film, so how could I not be happy? It was redemption. It was fun and exciting and made me feel like a kid again, and I laughed and smiled and just had fun, and that's what Star Wars is meant to be. It was everything The Last Jedi wasn't, and I loved it. Can't wait to see it again." First of all, that's awesome. I'm glad you loved the movie and had that much fun with it. And I agree, it's much better and feels more like Star Wars than The Last Jedi did. And though I don't disagree that social media oftentimes is a bit of a cesspool of hate and people complaining about pretty much anything and everything they can complain about, I think we're starting to lose the distinction between actual hate and people who just critique or offer constructive criticism because that's what they do or enjoy doing, and they mean no ill will by it. For example, I love Return of the Jedi. It's my favorite movie of all time and always will be. But I can certainly point out flaws or things that I don't like about it, or that I think could have been done better. And again, I can do it while loving it and not meaning one iota of maliciousness. For better or worse, that's just something I personally do and enjoy doing when it comes to movies or stories. I like trying to deconstruct them or discussing the finer details with people. It has absolutely nothing to do with hate. Alright, next up here we have this comment from The Butterstick, who said, 5 of 10. Had some nice moments, some good fan service. However, the story was crowded and it didn't make a whole lot of sense. The amount of fan service got a little annoying, and the ending still left the door open, making it not feel like an ending. I still liked parts of the movie though. The main issue is that 7 set up one thing, 8 took it in a completely different direction, and then this one switched directions yet again. Basically, when making this trilogy, it should have just been JJ or Ryan, one director, one complete cohesive vision. This one was just disappointing. And I think you're absolutely right. The biggest problem with this trilogy is a lack of a shared vision. One person, or a select few, should have been dictating the whole story and sat down and mapped it out from the very beginning. You certainly could have had different directors for each episode, and even different writers really, but they all needed to be following one set game plan, not doing whatever they wanted with each individual movie. The original trilogy had different writers and directors for the films, but it was always the vision of George Lucas. Moving on now, we have this comment from Rock Bottom Studios who said, "The ending is the worst ending in all of cinema. Besides being a cheap nostalgia grab, why would Rey stay on a desert planet when she hated being on one? Why bury the lightsaber on a planet that the Skywalkers hated? Hey, Anakin, remember that time you were a slave and your mom died? Hey, Luke, remember when you wanted to leave the planet so bad that your aunt and uncle were murdered on the planet? Hey, Leia, remember that time you were captured by Jabba and forced to be a slave on that planet? Yeah, good times." And you do make some very good points here, though I don't think Rey was intending to stay on Tatooine. She was just there to bury the sabers and move on because, well, I don't know. I really don't know why she buried them there, other than it being an excuse to look at the twin suns at the end of the film. Because, as you point out, there are a lot of not-so-fond memories for pretty much all the Skywalkers on Tatooine. Okay, let's now basically spend the rest of the video with me reading off comments, minus my own thoughts afterwards, starting with this one from Obi-Wan Kenobi, who said, "I'll say this, it felt more like a Star Wars movie than The Last Jedi did, but had some serious problems that cannot be overlooked. Outrageous force powers, rushed character development, which should have been introduced in previous movies, that nonsense about Rey just deciding to be a Skywalker, and above all that, the destruction of the idea of Anakin and the Chosen One, which basically makes being a Skywalker pointless. In the end, this movie just feels like a waste of time. An entire trilogy to just get us back to the exact same ending we had in Return of the Jedi, except it's inferior. It lacks the symbolism, story, consistency, foreshadowing, and meaning that makes Luke's original victory mean something. This movie is the final proof I need to know that Star Wars ends at Episode 6. Episodes 1 through 6 is all I need to understand and love George Lucas's masterful story." Next up, then, we have this comment from Nathan Duke, who said, "JJ did everything he could do with what he was given by Ryan. It was nice to see things like when Poe was explaining how the Holdo maneuver was extremely hard to replicate. Also, Luke catching the lightsaber was redemption for when he threw it away in the last movie. This movie could have only been better if Episode 8 set it up. The Emperor was the best part of the movie, but would have been nice to see Anakin one last time. Abrams is a fan of Star Wars, and Johnson just wanted to create controversy. 4.5 out of 5. I love this movie and can accept some of the flaws because I love Star Wars." Next, then, we have this comment from Joe Hoffman, who said, "This trilogy feels like one of those writing assignments from English class where you'd write one sentence, then pass it on to the next person, and then they'd write a sentence. Except they got passed back to the first person again, and they got all mad and decided to just finish it the way they wanted to and ignored the second sentence. Which is to say that it felt rushed and cramped and stubbornly assembled. For having a breakneck pace, it also felt weirdly empty, like it didn't have much to reveal. And most of the time, things it was revealing were revealed by characters just telling other characters that something is true. Nothing felt earned." Next up, we have this comment from Douglas Hawks, who said, "This movie was meh when it was doing its own thing, but every time it broke the fourth wall to wink wink, nudge nudge at the audience, it was awful. The fan service was awful, and so much of it was fan service. And fans don't want this kind of service. Use a natural, organic, and authentic callback to the past, not a blatant, disgusting, obvious pander. Screw this movie, it's terrible." And finally here, this comment from Greg Doty, who said, "People want to hate so badly." And I have to respectfully disagree with you. Yes, people will usually not hesitate to criticize or even hate on something they do not like. But at least in this case, I don't think any true fan wants to hate Star Wars. I don't think anybody really went into this trilogy wanting to not like it. They may have been skeptical about what Disney would do with it, but I really don't think people wanted to ever hate it. And like I was saying earlier, people just want to call everything hate these days. That and toxic are two words that are way overused and have lost their meaning. But people only call it hate when it's something they enjoy or agree with being attacked. When they do it, however, when they criticize something, They don't see it as hate, it's just justified criticism. Or what's even better is when people attack or hate on those they are calling haters, and they fail to see the irony. Anyway, one might say that the takeaway from the Rise of Skywalker and the sequel trilogy is that Star Wars fans are never going to agree on anything ever again. But then we look at all the love for The Mandalorian, and that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems like people aren't so eager to hate after all. And if anything, after being disappointed by the sequels, they actually seem quite eager to love something Star Wars again. Which does give me quite a bit of hope for the future of the franchise. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of The Rise of Skywalker, or what I or anyone else had to say in this video. Also, the video covering the Mandalorian poll should be up in the next few days, with a brand new poll to follow soon after, and I am open to suggestions on what that next poll should be. Anyway, you know the drill. Leave a comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.